Good morning, Hacksters, or afternoon, or whatever it is, wherever you are. Today in the studio, well, on screen we have Mohit Bhoite, who is a creator of beautiful circuit sculptures that I'm sure you've seen, as well as tons of other gorgeous creations and interesting things like LED sand animations. But anyway, good morning, Mohit. How's it going?
Good morning. Thank you for having me on this live interview.
Uh,
It's going well. The cats are in the background over there. That's
who's that we
Manju.
see?
Manju.
Manju, awesome. Beautiful. Well, let's talk about your sculptures. You have a few of them there.
Mhm.
And what's the latest one that you've done? They're these beautiful.
So the latest one, actually, I haven't posted on my website yet, but I do have it
Oh.
here, which was a firefly. This was part of a workshop that we conducted with Hackaday for their Remoticon.
Mm.
And we had to come up with a simple sculpture that folks can do in an hour or two. And so this is like a tiny little LED blinker based on the 555. But the idea is, how do you manipulate the components to make it appear like a firefly? So everything that you see on this particular sculpture is functional. The capacitors are bypass capacitors, tank capacitor, resistors, and LEDs. So that was my. It's funny. Like, this year has been interesting. So haven't been building as much, but whenever I get a chance, an excuse, I do dabble in some freeform art from time to time.
That's wonderful. I've had the joy of seeing some other ones of these come up, and one thing that I'm especially curious about is that, well, okay, you have a few sort of themes going. One of them is like space themed.
Right.
Obviously, you've got little satellites and things. But could you explain to us what a pummer is?
Yeah, definitely. So back in 1998, I was browsing through a Reader's Digest magazine, and I read an article about Mark Tilden. And the title was "The Man Who Builds His Own Robots." And the idea was, you build robots that have seemingly complex behaviors out of broken Walkman players and CD players and electronics. And that was perfect for me. As a teenager, I was like, I don't have access to DigiKey. I don't have access to Mauser. Like, how do I build robots and electronics without really actually buying? So the philosophy of BEAM being biology, electronics, aesthetics, mechanics, and you inspire from nature, biomimicry in a way. So the idea is, these life forms are usually powered by solar cells. And so one of the species, as they call it, is a pummer. And pummer, all it does, it's a bunch of solar cells from a broken calculator, but these are not broken. These actually were bought on DigiKey. The idea is that it's like a simple logic gate with like a supercapacitor, a tiny LED, and you create this circuit called a solar engine that stores energy in a supercapacitor all day long. And as soon as it's dark, the solar cells act as almost like sensors, and then the LED starts pumping. Maybe it's too bright in here. And so the pum action is like, the LED goes pum, pum. And so even though it doesn't make that sound, in your head, it appears that it's making that sound. So the idea is, it's almost like a firefly, where in the nighttime you will see. And it's like a self-sustaining, a sculpture, because it's charging by itself, has its own. And then there are so many variations in beams where you would have a solar head that tracks the sun, keep itself charged at all times. There are photo poppers, photo wars that chase light. It's show very seemingly.
Photovores. I get it.
And so the idea is, like, there is like photo. What's the opposite? I don't remember. Like, go away from the light, but then it basically will result in their death. But the photo wars are chasing lights constantly, and they show interesting behaviors because they have these bump sensors in front of them, so they can avoid obstacles. So that was my first foray into free-forming electronics, making robots, making. They didn't call it sculptures; it's mostly robotics. But that's how it all started, and I feel like I keep going back to the roots, where I'm like, I have access to computers, Raspberry Pis, Arduinos, 32-bit microcontrollers. But here I am in 2020 building small circuits. This is another take on the same thing. These
Oh,
are more efficient solar cells, and then it has like two LEDs at the back. And so, as you properly caught, that I tend to have themes. This helps me come up with ideas. So this is like a satellite theme. I have another theme for spaceships,
mm.
for microcontroller less. Then there's another one where I started dabbling with emotions.
Yes.
So this is Chintu. Chintu is a Hindi word to describe a small child
Oh,
or tiny. And so the idea is you're using simple 7-segment displays, but in addition to just showing you information, how can we make it express the information or convey the information? And so, I milled this out of brass on a Bantam mill.
that's
Bantam
really beautiful.
loaned me a mill, and then the whole structure is made out of 0.8 millimeter brass. And the main controller is a particle photon that is actually connected to the internet. So if I wanted to fetch something, fetch local weather information or a bus timetable or anything of that sort, we can do so. But in between, we can use those segments to convey emotions like sadness, happiness, joy, surprise. It's funny, like I wasn't anticipating this to happen, but every time I look at a 7-segment display, I feel like, oh man, that 7-segment display is talking to me.
It
It's very retro too. It's being
really
able to use
is.
wood, tiny little neopixel in there that can also change color, and we can associate that with an emotion or an alert.
I think
Yeah.
I think that's part of what people love about your projects is that they have these, technological components, but they really, the emphasis is not on the well, it is on the electronics, but in this aesthetically beautiful way. And then, once you get started looking at your sculptures and how beautiful they are and what they're made out of, then like everything that I have in my workshop starts to look gorgeous as well.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just trying to bring out what's already in front of our faces. We are looking at electronics all day long, but all we have to do is reimagine it in a way where it's aesthetically pleasing. Another example here is this little guy. His name is Zenyan.
Oh,
The same idea. You're using 7-segment display. It uses a particle xenon so that it talks over Bluetooth.
ah,
But this is one of my favorite sculptures because it allows me to mix a few of my favorite things. Robotics,
mhm.
uh, electronics, and then the ability to photograph or paint with light. So if you were to pull up Zenyan on my website, the idea is you take a long exposure photo and you blink the neopixels in such a pattern that it somehow just manages to write in thin air. And so that was a very fun little
Oh, I didn't
project
realize it
for
did
me.
that.
And the idea behind the name behind Zenyan is Xenon plus the Nyan cat, that shoots rainbows out of its butt or maybe tail, one or the other. And so that's the inspiration for this particular project.
Amazing.
So yeah, just being able to play with new fields like 3D printing, robotics, electronics, art form is what makes me happy. So just
Yeah. I feel
there you
like
go.
a lot of our interests overlap here. I've been playing with light painting for ages, but I never thought about building a little robot that just does it.
All
That's
right.
so adorable.
I know, and I have another project in mind where you can use a camera dolly or a slider
Uh-huh.
that just goes back and forth. Another way is you can put an LED on a 3D printer
Hmm.
and make it draw in thin air.
Now I see why you're building a Delta printer specifically. Where did it go?
That was my actually a first 3D printer building attempt. I actually had to dismantle it
Oh no.
because I just invested in Prusa, and ever since I moved to San Francisco, my lab has shrunk to 1/4 the size.
Oh wow, yeah.
And so this was back in Minneapolis. But this is like a fun little kit that you can, improvise and build.
Yeah, and if you're wanting to light paint with it, a Delta seems like the perfect choice because it's just so fast at going from point to point.
Exactly, totally. Yeah, that or even like any kind of CNC machine.
Hmm.
get the job done. But yes, and
I've
now
been working
imagine.
on a a Raspberry Pi based stereo camera that can take 3D light photography, like long
Mhm.
exposures with stereographic cameras. And it feels like this would be a perfect combo. You could get
Oh
like
yeah,
actually
totally,
3D
and
results.
stop motion animation too
Oh yeah.
and stuff.
Oh yeah. Some people call these freeform circuits or circuit sculptures. I've also heard like deadbug soldering. What is your favorite term for this stuff?
I think my favorite has evolved over time. So I used to like calling it free-formed because it's
Mm-hmm.
free from form, but also it's confusing because it's not completely free from form. You're actually forcing it into a form
Mm.
of your choosing. So I think I have settled down on just simply describing them as circuit sculptures because they are circuit sculptures at the end. Whether you freeform it or whether you actually have a like a fixture to hold things together and solder, and so that seems to do the most justice to this art form. But if you were to use Deadbug, that has its own place. The idea behind Deadbug is, if you flip an IC on its back,
Mhm.
the legs point up and it looks like a dead bug. And I'm not a big fan of that term, but that term, was heavily used in describing beam robotics because the idea was you were using broken electronics and putting uh, things
Ah.
together in a dead bug fashion. Then there's, ham radios, ham radio builders also use something called as Manhattan style, where you use a PCB as a ground plane and then you lay electronics, but in a dead bug form.
Oh yeah.
And so that's actually extremely suitable for that hobby because you have a reference ground plane and you have electronics on top of it, and you can build complete radios with that technique. So
Ah, I've seen some of that. It's incredible.
mhm.
And sorry, go on. Mhm.
No, and in this particular project, I like to use all the tools that I own, and so being able to use a 3D printer, being able to use a CNC mill. This was a thin little brass sheet that I was able to mill. I've seen other folks use the same technique, but with photo etching, where
Oh yeah.
you etch, and this has been used for decades in model making, like people who make tiny little architectural models or tiny little steam engines and steam trains. They actually use brass quite often.
Can you etch all the way through it with just an etchant?
Yeah, that's what
Ah,
I know. And the
cool.
sheet has to be thin enough, but that gives you an extremely high resolution
Hmm.
in what you want to etch. It's almost like making a PCB, but with brass
Yeah,
instead of copper.
wow. Speaking of tools, people often ask what your sculptures are made out of. Would you mind giving us the quick rundown on what you use to make these?
Totally. So I started off using 0.8 millimeter brass from Ace Hardware, and the original maker is KNS Metals. They are based out of Chicago,
Hmm.
and they're like pre-straightened, pre-trimmed 1 foot long rods that you can buy for in a couple of dollars. But then I realized my appetite for brass grew, and getting those pre-made bars became unsustainable. So I just brought a spool of, I believe, 22 gauge brass wire. Some of it is like hanging over there.
Ah.
Big spool, and all you have to do is cut it to length, put it in a drill chuck at one end, hold the other end with a pair of pliers, and twist it.
Mm.
And the twisting action makes turns the wire into a straightened rod or a straight piece of wire, and then you cut it, and then you can use it as much as you want, and it's like more economically viable to do so. And it's all this therapeutic. One afternoon, when I will just like take a drill press or like a hand drill, take a bunch of wire and create a stock brass out of it. But as far as tools go, I think I've shown this before, but this
Mm.
little guy uh, is my favorite. It's made by a company called Zuron.
Ooh.
Uron, and these are flat nose needle, sorry, shear cutters. But the best part is that they have this retaining. I don't know if you can see it, but a retaining clip. So when you cut through the brass, the other side doesn't go flying off.
Oh, that's amazing.
it stays in there. Maybe we'll show a live demo. How about that?
Oh yeah.
So, if you were to use a, oopsie, just like standard shears don't have anything. These are for cutting component leads. And if you
Hmm.
do that, let's hope it doesn't go flying off anywhere. So if you do that,
Yeah.
went somewhere.
And that's why you wear safety goggles when you're soldering stuff.
Exactly. Or just have
Partly.
glasses. And then the other, let's see if this will work live on camera. But the idea is, like, if you cut this,
Oh, that's
I feel like
incredible.
I'm doing a commercial for Zuron here. But I love these so much. I destroyed one accidentally a couple of weeks ago because I tried cutting into steel, thinking that it was tinned copper. So I had to get brand new ones. But yeah, that's one of my favorite tools. If you don't have it, it's not a big deal. You just put a finger and
Yeah, that's what I
cut
do.
through the brass. But you don't need special tools to create these sculptures. All you need is a ample of patience. And again, the idea of like bending brass, soldering it, cleaning it, it's very, very therapeutic,
Oh,
and
that sounds
almost
amazing.
meditative. It's almost like knitting or stitching or anything that you do with your hands. Uh, Very rewarding.
Yeah. Someone, our friend Yanni says, some of these look like that one droid from Jedi Fallen Order. And I'm not familiar with that droid, but you do have also a couple of sculptures that are Star Wars themed that we can look at.
They
You got
are,
the
yeah.
TIE Interceptor.
Yes. I loved building that one too. It's just a bedside clock, again, using your 7-segment displays, neopixels, wood, brass. I was inspired by uh, what's the architectural term you see a lot of in Chicago?
Art Deco?
Art Deco, yes. The
Yeah.
idea of like using parallel lines next to each other, and so trying to mix, because inspiration comes in all shapes and forms and from anywhere. So just like looking at things, and so this fighter was inspired. I was trying to make a mosaic,
Tiny
or
Darth Vader.
it actually has a tiny little speaker on top, so it will play the Star Wars theme song.
That's so good.
And you can set an alarm too. But the problem is, I got so annoyed after a couple of mornings. I'm like, no, I don't want to listen to this every screeching.
It doesn't
Like,
jazz you up in the morning? Oh, right, because
no,
they're really tinny, right? These
no.
little piezo speakers.
Yeah, very high pitch. And so I did not want to do that. And so this was also a fun little project. Again, a bedside clock. It's not next to the bed anymore, fortunately. But the idea of using, I I tend to try and use electronic components or brass to have a function or a reason to be there. But this particular sculpture uses the side wings as vanity. I mean, it's literally to support the structure, but then while you're doing it, why not,
Yeah.
try and create a mosaic of. This was inspired by, the Islamic art uses
It
a lot of.
does. It looks like the Iranian mosques.
Exactly. I bought a book that talks about Islamic geometric art, and that was the inspiration to actually go around trying to create some kind of a geometric pattern. And so just,
This is so
having fun, basically, with these life forms. Yeah, this was back in Minneapolis, where I had almost like an 800 square foot of makerspace in an attic. And now it's
Yeah.
one table. But yeah,
Now you have the Bay Area living tax.
I know. And I'm running out of space to store these. I usually tend to store them in glass jars, but they
Ooh.
end up taking a lot of space. I think you maybe see it right there.
Oh yeah, I see some of those
Yeah.
bell jars or whatever. What is that blinking on the wall behind you to the just by your head there
Oh,
above the cables?
so
Yeah.
so basically I like blinkies. On my wall above my monitor also have the whole like pegboards of electronics. When I'm bored, instead of looking out in the nature, I'm looking at my pegboards. Just looking at electronics. So these are just test circuits for a bistable multivibrator. There's a photon that has dot matrix display. I have
Mm.
a couple of other circuits up there that basically do nothing but blink. And so it's a again, the idea of using breadboards as a finished uh, piece of circuit. It's not
Mm.
just for breadboarding, but it's like a finished thing that you can put up somewhere and use. I have way too many breadboards. Working at Particle, we have access to so much electronics, and we move fast, so electronics get deprecated very fast too. And so
Oh
we
yeah.
with a lot of breadboards, a lot of USB cables, stuff like that. So I try to repurpose those for art or just for as hobby.
Mm. The thing you just said, I feel like I wonder if that's part of the attraction of these things is that having access to microcontrollers and having access to so many fabrication techniques and things, it's really it's nice to like go back and look at what you can do with the basics and how incredibly amazing they are for the time periods that they came out of, like what people were capable of at the time, and the amazing beauty that you can create with such simple materials.
Totally,
I'm
and
really
it's a
proud.
challenge too. It's a challenge to
Yeah.
like, how do I use logic gates? I don't even know what logic gates are anymore because I just write my code and poop, poop, poop.
Yeah.
You make your own logic gates and FPGAs. But it's definitely, as you said, it's nostalgic. It's fun to be using simple, basic circuits. As a fun challenge, and also I've seen a lot of folks on Instagram seem inspired because if you use fancy microcontrollers and electronics, it can be a deterrent to people who want to get into electronics. For
Right.
example, that Octagon LED flower
Oh, yeah.
that uses a simple, a bistable or astable
Ha ha ha.
multivibrator.
Multi-vibrator?
Yeah, and an
Yeah.
additional transistor to make the breathing pattern. And so the idea is, again,
Ah.
you don't need to know programming. You don't need to know fancy microcontrollers. You can just use transistors, resistors, capacitors to create sculptures. And so somehow, like this seems more like approachable for many people who know about electronics and know a little about electronics.
That's beautiful.
Yeah,
I'm just kind of speechless because of this. Go ahead.
there might be a video too. This was, I don't remember the inspiration, but the idea was like a light tower that goes boom, just like breathe slowly.
Hmm.
Again, it's, and the reason why it's approachable is also because it's brass, simple LEDs and resistors, and so you don't have to invest a lot in tools and parts either. You can
Now, on
start.
some of these, you do use a 3D printer for things like jigs, which is
Yes,
interesting.
definitely. Yeah, this particular theme or series was handled with care because I literally had handles, broken measuring cups, 6 of them. I'm
Oh.
like, again, what can I build with a handle? And so the idea being, oh, let's make a flashlight or let's make a video game. And so this was uh, a very challenging project to build because there are these LED matrices, and then you have to put microcontrollers on top of it, and yada yada. But it was very rewarding after it was finished. And I used the same jig to make another like LED matrix sculpture, and so being able to repurpose,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
so the handle, the snake game also came out of a jig. Again, it was in the handle with care series. This was also challenging because I had to use a 8x8 LED matrix driver and controlled by Adafruit, tiny
Ah.
trinket. So I tend to use mostly Adafruit and Particle products. They're both open source, and
Oh.
I'm a big fan of both of those companies. One, I work for Particle.
Yeah.
Second, like Adafruit is just one of the shining stars in
They
open
really are.
source. And so yeah, again, you can see Islamic pattern inspired back 3D printed plate on it.
Oh, yeah.
It's I was trying to go for marble look, with the white
Mm.
cover. And it's a tiny little joystick, and you play the old Nokia Snake game on it.
That's amazing. And you have probably some videos up on your Instagram, I would guess, which is one
Yes,
place people can follow you.
definitely. Yeah, I don't have much videos on YouTube or my website, but Instagram is where I mostly post a lot
Wow.
of videos and pictures.
And new things before they get on your website.
Hmm. And so, yeah, this was Akash Kandil, which literally translates to sky lantern, and it's
Oh.
usually made during Diwali in India. You make it out of paper. This is just like a interesting geometric shape. I don't even know how to pronounce it. Cubata hedron,
Ah.
using square faces, and again, traditionally made out of bamboo and paper, but I wanted to make it out of brass. So this was a fun little Diwali project.
So much inspiration from existing art forms, and obviously, uh, and a motorcycle mod as well. But like, yeah, with the drawing inspiration from Art Deco, from the Islamic mosque mosaics, from
Mhm.
these lanterns and things, you seem to have a really deep appreciation for existing art and just be able to reimagine them in a way that I think is really compelling.
Yes, and once you start building, you see inspiration everywhere. You just like your mind somehow gets trained and tuned into uh, capturing these ideas, and you don't even know you're doing it because you have mind is like, oh, that looks like an art form. Oh, Japanese carpentry. Oh, maybe this is like plumbing. Plumbing looks like a good art form. So it's just like a never-ending
Yeah, plumbing, totally.
cycle of ideas. Once you put yourself out there, you start seeing things.
Some of these really remind me of cable management.
Oh yeah,
Where's the one that we were just looking at? Oh yeah, some of these with the incredibly intricate back wiring.
yeah. I cannot tell you how many hours I've spent looking at Japanese carpenters making furniture out of bamboo, like the bamboo
Ooh.
leaves, and they make these boxes and baskets. It's just mesmerizing, and so trying to bring that into my world,
Mm.
you know, it's fun.
We have a question about how do you plan your wiring? So do you make sketches and stuff beforehand, or?
I do, yeah. So I will make rough sketches on like in a notebook with hand, and then if it requires precision planning, then I will literally draw it in a CAD program like Eagle, uh, a PCB designer. So I will literally draw it as if it was a circuit board, because
Huh,
then that gives me control over the width of the wire, the distance, the spacing, and I can take a
right.
print out, one-to-one scale. And if it's a three-dimensional, then you chop it down into layers, because PCBs, you can have multiple layers on a PCB,
Right.
but you can explode that onto a sculpture. And so if you go layer by layer, still designing PCBs, we can achieve the precision. And so, yeah, I do use Adobe Illustrator or Fusion 360 or Eagle CAD, or simple, pen and paper on a graph paper works fine too. But yeah, a lot of sketching beforehand. Then I also like to first breadboard the circuit, so to make sure it is
That
working
makes
properly,
sense.
and then go on to the final sculpture.
Mm. So you have so many skills that you combine to create these sculptures and more. Uh, you talked about working with Illustrator, you have this keen artistic sense, but you also know a lot about how to put together things like, supercapacitors and other discrete components in order to create these circuits. I'm wondering, what is your background? Like, how were you trained? Where do you learn these things? Are you mostly self-taught? Did you go to college for one of these disciplines?
Like every child, I grew up wanting to be an astronaut, obviously. And then I tried to get into an aerospace program in India, but it was very, very competitive. And so I couldn't get into aerospace. So my next bet was like, maybe I'll build robots. And so I got an engineering degree in electronics, but there
Ah,
was nothing for robotics. So I learned robotics on my own, taught robotics at a startup back in India, and then ended up at a graduate program in the US and did my master's in robotics. So my background is electronics, robotics. So I've been trained in that. In terms of art, I feel like the credit goes to my two sisters. I have two elder sisters. One is an economist, the other one is an interior designer. Completely different worlds, and they introduced me, the idea of like liking math and art at the same time. And so just I have been comfortable living in between those two worlds. And so that's my happy place. I don't get too nerdy about electronics or too nerdy about art. Somewhere in between. And I also feel, having this privilege to constantly be able to learn and add to the new skill sets. I just am finding excuse to learn new things. For example, I really want to learn, the neon sign making, where you
Oh
could
yeah.
about glass. I want to learn about ceramics, pottery, and how I can use that in sculpture. There's so many things out there that you could be learning, and if you have access to it, then why not?
Oh yeah, ceramics. Until a couple years ago, you could get things 3D printed and turned into ceramics by Shapeways, and I
Yeah.
just discovered that they discontinued it recently. When I was trying to design these like sake cups, and I was so sad. And so I would love to do ceramics, but like as always, we're space limited, and just like figuring out how to do those in a small space in like a modern lifestyle is such a challenge.
It is a challenge, but also we live, like you and I, live in a big city. So if you are
That's
living
true.
in California, which is like the one of the states to be, I
Mhm.
think it would be a crime not to, expose yourselves to new ideas and skills. And so,
Mm.
but even though, and we are like 2020 has been interesting, but even if you can't have access to it at home, maybe we join a makerspace where we get access to
Right.
welding and a pottery studio and whatnot. So
Like even Noisebridge has had a kiln, and then there's the Crucible where you can do neon and glass stuff and whatever. Yeah, in non-COVID times, that's definitely the way to go. I personally came up in the makerspace scene, and like it's such a positive thing to have a shared space for a massive laser cutter for a kiln.
exactly, yeah. And
Vinyl
even
cutters.
wood cut, like woodwork. Sorry, you cannot combine uh, woodworking and electronics. Sawdust and whatnot. But yeah, woodworking, access to woodworking at a makerspace or welding equipment. I don't even know how much effort it would take to have all of that at home. But I think makerspaces are the way to go.
Really? So, speaking of which, how did you create the wood pieces for these? Are these secretly 3D printed, or did you get like
I wish they were 3D printed, but no, these were milled on a Bantam
Oh,
CNC.
right.
And so they look extremely simple. You can do it on a router, but the mill allows you to create these pockets and precision holes
Mm.
to mount the electronics. And this is not necessarily a brass sculpture, and you will never see those brass wires because they're at the bottom. But the
Mhm.
idea is, secretly it's still brass uh, underneath. And so using these Numitron tubes, so these are not Nixie, these are like your incandescent bulb. Like it literally has
Wow.
an element inside that you can energize with very low voltage. 5 volts is more than enough. But it gives you a nice natural glow of the Nixie, but not at the same time. You're not working with high voltages.
That's a great tip. That's definitely prevented me from doing Nixie stuff in the past, is you have to have these ridiculous power supplies or like transformers or whatever in there.
Exactly. And
Huh.
so yeah, these are just like beautiful to look at. And this also makes a good candidate for a bedside clock because the glow, like even if everything is dark, you don't want bright LEDs shining in your face.
No.
But the natural, like the glow of these filaments, is actually very good to look at in the dark. And so it doesn't strain your eye when you're looking at what the time is.
Yeah, it looks like it's not really throwing off any blue light at all.
No, and you can really dim it down too. And so work
It
that.
looks like you created your own PCBs for working with these.
Yeah, so they're purple, which means it's Oshpark.
Artwork!
And so they were kind enough to give me these coupons at one of these events.
Mm,
And so
that's
I
true
ended up,
for you.
yes, exactly. And so he was kind enough to give me those. And so I ended up making these tiny little Numitron drivers. They're not necessarily drivers, they're basically multiplexers. So I can control all the filaments
Cool.
over I2C. And so, yeah, it was like a simple little PCB that you
I
stick
was gonna say,
together.
wow.
and uses again and one of my favorite controllers, which is the Adafruit Trinket M0. Tiny little thing, but very powerful. And then there's also an RTC clock
Mm-hmm. Oh,
to
makes sense.
retain time. So yeah, I've been now recently experimenting with designing these instead of wood, just with plastic. The idea that this is like a light bar that I use for photography,
Uh-huh.
and then you can change RGB lights
Ha.
and create or mix colors. And so I recently made a bigger version of this using a cheap NeoPixel or WS28
Ooh,
Pro
yeah.
panel. And so again, having access to the 3D printer just opens up your world to create literally anything you want. My partner says I like building toys, and she views them as toys, but they
It's
are.
also art, though.
Yeah.
And why not both?
What was that?
Oh, I said it's also art, and like, why not both? It can be lots of things. Uh-huh.
Exactly. And again, being able to make your own toys, like how cool is that? Like, why wouldn't you be doing that? So this thing gets pretty bright.
Wow, yeah. Did you 3D print also the little knobs for your potentiometers up there?
I did.
Ah, it matches so well with the pastel pink case.
Yeah, I love these color schemes. I got these from Micro Center, like the filaments. They were on sale for like $8 a kg. So
Wow.
I basically literally bought a dozen different colors in the same color scheme, and so
It
I
reminds me
personally.
of some of the work by Sailor Mercury and other people who are making sort of pastel
Oh
electronics and
yeah,
pastel alligator clips and things like that.
yeah, and usually you look at electronics and robots, and they are like metal and gray and black,
Mm-hmm.
and it just makes it look very serious, but it doesn't have to be. You can still use colors in robots. There's no reason to shy away from colors when you're making electronics. I think folks tend to gravitate towards more neutral, cold, almost schemes, but I love playing with colors. And so I it's not on my website, it might be on my Instagram. There's this a four-legged like a walking robot. It's like down in history. Uh, that traditionally, it looks like a crab or a toy, but being able to use color to build robots is also fun. So
Oh, here we go.
is that? Yep.
Is this
Yes.
We're gonna play the video. Yes, look at that go!
So it uses an ADF
It
logo.
just fell off the table.
It fell off the table. Yes.
Whoop.
Whenever I turn this on, the cats they freak out. They don't know
Oh,
what
I
this.
bet.
They don't want anything to do with it. There's also another bipedal robot. I forget the name. That also I used a bunch of colors. So again, that was an Omni robot, Christmas trees. There
Ooh,
was
you
a
got the.
snowflake.
Is it the Omnivice?
Oh, it
Yeah.
is. Yes, it's one of
Ooh.
my favorites.
Nice.
That Arduino Flake or Snowflake that Yuri Prowse had gifted me a couple of Christmases ago. This was fun.
Beautiful.
So he sells this kit. I don't know if he's selling it this year, but
And you did a workshop recently with him as well as Kelly Heaton, is that right?
yes, exactly. And we were able to combine our different unique circuit sculpture building techniques. So that
I'll
was
have to watch that.
so always using cats. Why not cats on PCBs?
Why not? So your Instagram is clearly the place to go for like the newest, latest Mohit creations. Do you have anything you can share about upcoming projects? What's next on the stack?
Lots of projects in the background.
Oh.
The latest has been latest for a while. Is I'm trying to build a FM radio.
Ooh.
In this scheme where I have this cube with 7 segments, and somehow being able to change the frequency by changing the angle of the head.
Oh.
And so I don't know. I'm still playing with the idea, but this has been sitting on my desk for a few months now. Whoa, look who-
So a
Hello.
radio receiver or transmitter?
Yeah.
Oh!
This is Yoshi. Recently got Yoshi. Yeah, it's lots of versions.
Oh my goodness. Best interview ever. Julian says, how do you keep your cats from destroying your creations? Might be Julian, I'm not sure.
I mean, I don't actively think about them destroying, but now that you mention they can, yes, they could actually destroy. They don't. They're pretty kind to electronics for some reason. But if it's a piece of paper, they love chewing on my antennas.
Oh no.
Those flexible PCB antennas, they just, I don't know. And so the antenna still performs, but that's the only thing they have destroyed till now. Otherwise, they are good helpers. They will sniff out dead bugs. I'm kidding.
So if you're working with the particle electron, you got to be careful around that because you got a
Exactly.
little antenna on it. But
Exactly.
otherwise, they're nice.
Yeah, and being able to just have everything up on a shelf, on a pegboard really helps.
That makes
But
sense.
they are getting creative and climbing things.
Well, that's part of the fun, right?
Exactly.
Oh, these are so beautiful.
And so that was the FM radio circuit on the right.
Yes, there we go.
Yeah. But I haven't been, basically I want to transform that into a sculpture as well.
I bet it will be beautiful. Look at it go. Oh, and here you have like an actual, just a little wire as an antenna. Hopefully it won't be as tempting.
Yeah, hopefully when it's made of brass, it won't be as tempting. Exactly.
Yeah. Are there other artists who inspire you? We've talked about art movements, and then also working with Yuri and Kelly. And who else would you recommend people check out? Who was that person you mentioned earlier who made the robots out of broken things?
Oh yeah, Mark Tilden.
We'll find him.
He is like my personal hero and guru in terms of who introduced me to electronics as a kid, and the idea of freeforming it. So this is a good example of a dead bug where the IC is on its back, and this is a circuit that goes into one of those pummers. Basically, it's a RC oscillator using logic gates. But yeah, Mark Tilden and I think Peter Vogel, who was a German artist, he passed away, but he made beautiful, beautiful electronic music sculptures.
Ooh.
I have zero background in music. Maybe I can create noise, but I wish I had a background in music and I could make sound sculptures, but I stick to light and robotics. But yeah, his theme was, creating interactive, beautiful art installations. And he is, I think I might even have his book right there. It's in German, so I can't understand it, but there are lots of pictures. And who else? I think Hackaday 2 years ago, conducted a competition for freeform electronic sculptures. And there we saw so many good entries. And I love when people build sculptures and have their own style and technique. There are folks that are using copper, tinned copper. It gives a completely different look. Using organic form like Kelly does in her sculptures. She's not constrained to geometric shapes. I come from an engineering background and designing circuit boards all day long. All I see are 45-degree angles and right angles. And so that's my mindset. But I love the approach that she takes. It's like more organic, more close to nature. And so, in fact, it's even more difficult to do that than keeping two wires straight. So,
interesting. Yeah. Kitty's fighting in the background. This is so good. Well, we'll put links to a couple of those in the description in case people are curious, as well as, of course, your Instagram. I could scroll through this forever. It's so compelling. Oh, look at these! Even look at these little attachments that you've made here. This is so brilliant.
Yeah, I've been trying to, all of our electronics. We gather over years so many electronics and dev boards and kits, and they all are in boxes.
Yeah.
And so, wouldn't it be nice that you could put it up, and create almost an ambience surrounded by electronics? But at work, we also have to have a bunch of electronics for testing. And I was using breadboards as a medium to put up electrons and borons and photons. But I want to start putting up these feather formats.
Right.
Where using feather doublers, and again, super
Ooh,
easy, super
okay.
cheap to make. You can buy these heat set inserts from anywhere now.
Oh,
That little rivet is like a plastic rivet from McMaster-Carr. Easily allows you to pop things into the pegboard. So
brilliant. Oh, I gotta steal that. I've got, this huge blank wall and then like a shelf covered in, I won't use the word that instantly springs to mind. But yeah, this is great. Oh man.
I
And
know, and it just like creates a fun little creative space, because I mean, unless you really, really dislike the aesthetics of a pegboard and stuff on it, I think it serves two purposes. It helps you organize your electronics tools, and also creates this like a creative workspace ambiance.
yeah. Oh, I'm just looking at your background there and I'm so jealous. But it could be mine. Or I could do my own version of it. It's all around.
Exactly, you can do your own vision of
Cool.
it.
So everyone follow Mohit on Instagram. You can also find him on Twitter. And then of course on mohitbhoite.com. And thank you so much for joining us. Of course, you're welcome on any time that you like. We love to hear from you and see all of your new creations. And this is a dream come true. Thank you so much for spending some time with us this morning.
Thank you for having me here. It's fun to talk about things you like to build.
So good. I can't believe how much aesthetically we're inspired by the same things, and so such a pleasure.
And maybe after 2020 we'll be able to hang out at meetups.
Someday.
Exactly.
Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you soon. In the meantime, hack on. Ciao.
Thank you. Bye-bye.